In the stillness of the old world, when the golden roofs of Asgard gleamed in the glow of a sun that seemed eternal, there was one among the gods who never sat quietly at the feast, whose laughter could unsettle even the most patient of the Aesir, whose words could warm or wound with equal ease. Loki, born of fire and frost, walked among the halls of Odin not as one of blood, yet bound by oath and friendship, by cunning and strange necessity. He was the trickster, the shapeshifter, the restless spirit who could wear the face of friend or foe, who could weave a lie so bright it shone brighter than the truth. And though his tricks brought laughter and gifts to the gods, though he secured treasures that no other could have won, in him smoldered a fire that could not be contained. From that fire came not only chaos but also the children who would carry the weight of endings upon their backs. It is told that far from the gleaming walls of Asgard, in the wilderness of Jotunheim, Loki lay with the giantess Angrboda, she who dwelt in the ironwood. The trees there grew tall and twisted, their shadows long even in daylight, and in her hall of stone she bore to him 3 children. They were not like the sons and daughters of men, nor even like the brood of other giants. They were creatures marked by fate, stamped with a destiny too great for the halls of gods to contain. The first was a wolf cub, small yet fierce, his eyes dark as a winter night without stars. Fenrir they named him, though at first his body was no larger than a hunting dog. He grew with a hunger no food could satisfy, his teeth sharp before he ever tasted meat, his howl sending shivers down the spines of even the bravest. To look into his gaze was to feel a shadow pass over the sun. The second was a serpent, coiling in restless silence from the moment of his birth. His body shimmered with a sickly sheen, his tongue flickering in the air as though he sought the taste of oceans he had never seen. Jörmungandr, the Midgard serpent, destined to grow so vast that his body would encircle the world and his jaws would bite upon his own tail. In his venom lay the promise of death to gods and men alike. The third was a girl, and she was stranger than the first 2. Her form was divided, half of her skin soft and fair, alive with the warmth of youth, while the other half was pale and cold, the color of a corpse left to rest beneath the earth. Her eyes bore the stillness of the grave, yet in them was a calm unlike the ferocity of her brothers. Hel was her name, and in her was the dominion of death itself. When word of these births reached Odin, the All-Father, he grew troubled, for his wisdom was deeper than that of any other god. He had given his eye for a drink at Mimir's well, and visions often troubled his nights. In dream he had seen the wolf grown so vast that he swallowed the sun, the serpent stirring storms that drowned the land, and the pale daughter ruling over halls of the dead. He knew then that these children, though innocent in their first breaths, bore within them the seeds of doom. So Odin called the council of the gods, and together they spoke of what must be done. To let the children grow free was to invite the end of all things, yet to destroy them outright was to stain their hands in blood that even the Norns themselves might condemn. For fate once woven is not so easily cut, and the Norns, weaving beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, had already set their threads. Thus it was decided, the children of Loki must be taken, each to their place away from the golden halls. Fenrir was brought into Asgard itself at first, for though his nature was fearsome, he was still only a wolf cub. The gods wished to raise him, to watch him, to test the strength that seemed to grow by the day. Yet even as a youth he was too much for all but one to handle. Only Tyr, the god of honor and oaths, dared approach him without fear. Tyr would feed him when none else dared. For the wolf's teeth grew sharp, his body vast, and his eyes glimmered with something more than beastly hunger. The serpent Jörmungandr was cast into the sea. Odin himself took the writhing child and flung him into the waters that circle Midgard. Down he sank, coiling and growing, until the depths themselves seemed to tremble. There in the cold and the dark he thrived, swelling in size until his body stretched across oceans, until he lay encircling the earth, his jaws nearly touching his tail. The waves bore his weight, storms followed his stirrings, and sailors whispered of the great serpent who dwelt beneath. As for Hel, Odin sent her down far below the roots of the world, into Niflheim, the land of ice and shadow. There she was given rule over a realm of her own, a kingdom not of light, but of silence. From her throne she watched over those who died not gloriously in battle, but by age, by sickness, by quiet misfortune. Half her body gleamed with the beauty of life, half with the pallor of death, and so too her realm was divided, half comfort for the weary dead, half dread for those who feared her gaze. She grew there, apart from Asgard, apart from her brothers, yet her name would one day echo in the halls of the gods as surely as theirs. Thus were Loki's children set apart, bound not by chains of iron, but by destinies greater than the gods themselves could master. Fenrir in his bonds would grow vast and strong. Jörmungandr in the seas would stretch until he encompassed the world. Hel in her realm would gather countless souls. And though each was parted from the other, in the weaving of the Norns their fates were bound together, threads of shadow braided into the tapestry of the end. Yet in those early days, before the wolf broke free, before the serpent stirred the seas in wrath, before Hel closed her gates upon the fairest of the gods, there lingered a strange quiet. For children they were still, even if children of dread. Fenrir would lie at Tyr's feet, his tongue lolling as if in play. Jörmungandr would coil in the dark, his body still not yet the endless length it would one day become. Hel, silent, would wander her cold halls, gazing at the souls that came to her, half compassion in her glance, half unyielding judgment. The gods, though fearful, still hoped that perhaps fate might yet be swayed, that perhaps the wolf's hunger would not be endless, that perhaps the serpent's growth would cease, that perhaps the girl's gaze would soften. But Odin, who had seen too much, trusted not in hope. He alone among them knew that these children were not accidents, nor mere offspring of a mischievous god and a giantess, but heralds of what was to come. He watched them as one watches the horizon for storm clouds, knowing they will break but not knowing when. And Loki, their father, what of him? He watched too, though with a stranger heart. For in his eyes they were his blood, his legacy, his mark upon the world. Some say he laughed at their strangeness, proud of their terror. Others whisper he feared for them, knowing the hatred they would endure. But Loki was ever divided, part father, part trickster, part foe of gods, and yet their companion. In him too lay contradiction, and in contradiction the seed of calamity. So the days passed, and the children of Loki grew, each in their place, each under the shadow of prophecy. The gods would speak of them in hushed tones. They would feast and drink, yet in the silence of their hearts the vision of a wolf swallowing the sun, a serpent spewing venom into the sky, and a pale queen sitting upon a throne of bones would not fade. The tapestry of fate was already stretched upon the loom. The Norns had set their threads, and though the gods might weave their own deeds upon it, they could not unmake what had been foretold. The children of Loki were not merely born into the world. They were born into the story of its end, and so while Asgard shone and Midgard thrived, while Thor laughed at his feasts and Odin pondered at his seat, while Freya wept her tears of gold, and Heimdall gazed with unblinking eyes beneath it all in shadow and in silence, the children of Loki waited. The wolf strained against invisible chains, the serpent coiled deeper into the seas, the queen of the dead extended her hand to every mortal soul. They waited, and they grew, and they dreamed. And though the world did not yet tremble, though the gods yet thought themselves safe in their golden halls, the roots of Yggdrasil had already begun to quiver with the weight of what was to come, for fate once woven may bend, may twist, but never breaks. And in that fate lay the legacy of Loki, a legacy not of mischief alone, but of children whose shadows would one day stretch across all the 9 realms. In the quiet age when the walls of Asgard still glimmered like embers of dawn, and the laughter of the gods carried freely across the golden courtyards, there was one presence among them that did not belong to light. He came not as a guest, nor as a prisoner, but as a child whose destiny was already whispered through the roots of Yggdrasil. His name was Fenrir, son of Loki and Angerboda, born of mischief and shadow, yet brought into the very heart of the gods. At first he was only a wolf cub, small enough to rest at Tyr's feet, playful in his youth, his fur dark as storm cloud midnight, his eyes gleaming with the strange fire of inheritance. The Aesir had brought him into their realm with a mixture of boldness and dread. They told themselves that to keep him near was wiser than to let him roam free, that to raise him within the sight of Asgard's spears was safer than to let him grow unseen among the giants. And so the wolf wandered among the gods like a living omen, his paws striking sparks of fear in every heart. The days passed and the cub grew. Where once he was small, he became larger than any hunting hound, his shoulders swelling, his teeth sharper, his gaze darker. The gods would watch him from the corners of their halls. Their cups of mead paused at their lips as the wolf padded past, his breath steaming in the golden air. What began as curiosity turned slowly into unease. The laughter of Thor quieted when the wolf prowled near. The shining beauty of Baldur dimmed as his eyes met those of the growing beast. Even Odin, who had seen more than any, regarded the wolf with a shadow of silence, for the dreams that haunted him whispered of jaws that would one day swallow the sun. Only Tyr, god of oaths and courage, treated the wolf as more than a monster. He alone brought meat to Fenrir's side, laying it at his paws with steady hands. He alone would rest his palm on the wolf's head without flinching, speaking to him as one might speak to a son. In those moments Fenrir would soften, his eyes closing, his breath settling into the rhythm of a child at rest. To Tyr he was not yet the doom foretold, but a living creature, a soul caught between innocence and fate. Yet as the years drifted, Fenrir's growth became too great to ignore. He swelled larger than stags, larger than bears, larger even than the horses of the gods. His back brushed against the beams of halls when he entered. His howl could roll across the plain and shake the spears upon their racks, and with his strength came hunger that no meat could fill. The gods began to whisper that he was a danger too great to leave untethered. Their feasts grew quieter, their laughter subdued, until at last Odin spoke the words aloud. The wolf must be bound. At first they sought to test him. They forged a chain of iron, heavy and strong, its links ringing like hammers of war. They named it Lading, and they brought it forth with voices soft as play, telling Fenrir it was only a game. "See how strong you are," they said. Test your might against this chain." Fenrir, who trusted Tyr and sought no trick, allowed them to wrap the chain around his limbs. The gods fastened it tight, and for a moment relief flickered in their eyes. But with a shake of his shoulders and a roar that sent birds into the sky, the wolf snapped, lading like twigs beneath his weight. The lynx scattered, clattering upon the stones, and the laughter of the gods was hollow. Still they tried again. They forged a second chain, twice as thick, hammered with runes of power. They called it Dromi, heavier and stronger than the first, a band they believed could not be broken. Again they coaxed the wolf, telling him it was a challenge worthy of his might. Fenrir, his chest broad and his pride high, agreed. Once more they clasped the iron about his legs, their hands trembling though their faces smiled. And once more the wolf strained, his muscles swelling like mountains, his growl deep as thunder rolling across a fjord. The chain held for a heartbeat, two, then shattered with a crack like the breaking of trees in storm. The shards flew, cutting the hands of those who held them. Fenrir shook free, his fur bristling, his eyes burning. Now fear took root in every heart. The wolf was stronger than the forges of the gods, stronger than the runes they inscribed. They muttered in secret, gathering in dark councils until they came to Odin once more. The Allfather nodded, for he had foreseen this too, and so he sent word to the dwarves of Svartalfheim, the master smiths beneath the mountains, cunning in craft beyond all measure. To them was given the task of forging a fetter that no beast could break. The dwarves set to work, not with hammers alone, but with secrets of the hidden world. They gathered the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the breath of a fish, the spittle of a bird. From these impossibilities they wove Gleipnir, a ribbon thin as silk, yet strong as the bones of fate. Smooth and soft it seemed, light enough to wrap around the hand, but in its weave was power older than fire. When the gods brought it forth, Fenrir eyed it with suspicion. This was no heavy chain, no clattering iron, but a ribbon that glimmered in the sun. He narrowed his eyes, for he had grown wary of their games. "This seems a trick," he said, his voice like gravel beneath ice. "If you would bind me with such a thing, I demand a pledge. One among you must place their hand within my jaws as token of faith. If you mean no deceit, you will not fear." The gods fell silent, glancing at one another. None stepped forward, for none wished to lay their hand in the maw of the wolf. At last, Tyr, faithful Tyr, rose. Without a word, he placed his hand between the wolf's teeth. His eyes met Fenrir's, not with fear, but with sorrow. The wolf gazed back, and for a moment it was as though trust remained. Then he lay himself down, and the gods wound the ribbon about him. They coiled it around his legs, his shoulders, his neck. At first Fenrir shook, and the ribbon stretched. He strained, muscles quivering, the ground trembling beneath him. Yet Gleipnir held. He pulled harder, his roar echoing across the 9 realms, but the ribbon only tightened. He writhed, he thrashed, but still it held. The gods stepped back, their relief heavy as stone. It was then Fenrir understood. He snapped his gaze to Tyr, his jaws closing in rage and betrayal. In an instant the god's hand was severed, blood falling upon the stones. Tyr cried out, not in pain, but in the grief of oath broken, for he had promised faith, and yet the gods had deceived. The wolf howled, a sound that split the sky, a cry of fury and anguish, of trust betrayed. He gnashed his teeth, but Gleipnir would not break. There he lay, bound upon the plain, his breath steaming, his eyes burning with the fire of rage. The gods, though they feared him, rejoiced in their triumph. They drove a sword into his jaws to hold them open, the hilt pressed against his gums, the blade wedged in his throat. Saliva poured like rivers, forming a stream called Van, the river of expectation. Bound and silenced, the wolf lay in chains, but within him the fire did not die. Day by day, year by year, he grew, his strength pressing against the ribbon, his hatred burning hotter than the sun. He dreamed of freedom, dreamed of the day when Gleipnir would break, when the gods who had mocked and tricked him would feel the depth of his jaws. In his eyes there was no play now, no childlike trust, only the smoldering certainty of vengeance. And yet in the silence of night there were moments when the wolf remembered Tyr's hand upon his head, the only kindness he had known among the gods. He remembered how the god had fed him when all others feared. And though it was Tyr who had paid the price, it was also Tyr who had proven that even in the house of enemies there could be one who did not flinch. That memory was bitter comfort, for it reminded him not only of loyalty, but of the cruel betrayal that had severed it. So Fenrir lay bound, the vast wolf of prophecy, waiting in silence while the world above still shone. The gods feasted and laughed, believing the danger subdued. But beneath their joy was the echo of his howl, the memory of his eyes. For though they had chained his body, they could not chain fate. And in the weaving of the Norns, it was written that on the day of Ragnarok, Fenrir would rise, the bonds would break, and the sun itself would vanish in his jaws. Until that day he waited, silent and bound, his breath the whisper of storm, his heart the drumbeat of vengeance. In the hush of ages past, when Asgard gleamed with gold and Midgard's seas lay wide and waiting, there was born a creature whose destiny reached beyond the bounds of earth. He was not forged in halls of gods, nor in the warm hearths of men, but in the shadowed forests of Jotunheim, the child of Loki and Angrboda. From the first breath he drew, his body writhed like water disturbed by unseen currents, his tongue flickering to taste a world he was not yet meant to rule. He was Jörmungandr, the serpent of Midgard, the second child of Shadow, a being whose future was tangled in the web of fate. At his birth, he was no larger than a coil that could rest upon the arm of his mother. But even in those early days there was a restlessness in his body, a ceaseless motion, as though the life within him could not be contained. His scales shimmered faintly, glistening like oil upon water, green and black, silver and gray. His eyes opened not with innocence, but with a knowledge older than words, older than time, as if the depths already called to him from beyond the horizon. When word of this child reached Odin, the All-Father's brow darkened. Already he had seen too much of fate's weaving. Already he knew that this serpent would not remain small. In visions he had beheld seas boiling, storms crashing against cliffs, and a great coil that circled the earth until its head met its tail. The Midgard serpent, whose venom could slay even the gods, whose body would strangle the world. And so Odin, burdened with wisdom, resolved that this child could not remain. He took Jörmungandr in his hands. The serpent writhed and coiled, but Odin's grip was iron, the strength of the All-Father unyielding. Without word or hesitation, he walked to the edge of the world where the waters lay vast and dark, and there he cast the serpent into the sea. Down, down he fell, slipping through waves like a falling star, his body striking the waters with a hiss that echoed through all 9 realms. For a time he sank in silence. The surface closed above him, the light of day dimming, fading until only darkness remained. The sea embraced him like a cradle of cold, and in that cold he began to grow. He grew as no creature had grown before. His body stretched long, his coils twisting upon themselves, each day adding to his length, each season making him vaster. The fish that swam near him fled in terror, yet he devoured them in hunger that could not be satisfied. Whales disappeared into his jaws, ships that strayed too far vanished without trace, their crews swallowed in the silence of the deep, and still he grew. The ocean floor quaked beneath his weight. His body wound through the caverns of the deep, wrapping around mountains hidden beneath the waves. He stretched across trenches where light had never dwelt, and still he grew. The years turned like waves upon the shore, and at last he was so vast that his coils encircled the earth itself. He bit upon his own tail, and in that endless circle he lay, the world's horizon bound by his form. Yet though his body bound the world, his heart was bound by solitude. For in the deep there was no laughter, no voice, no warmth. The sea was his cradle, his cage, his kingdom. He swam in silence, hearing only the echo of his own coils. He felt the weight of mountains pressing upon his body, the cold seep into his scales. He tasted salt and silence, bitterness and storm. There were times he rose near the surface, lifting his head from the waves. Sailors glimpsed his eyes in the moonlight and cried out in terror, their voices swallowed by wind. They told tales of the great serpent whose body circled the earth, whose breath stirred waves, whose motion brought storms. Some said he was a mountain rising from the sea. Others whispered he was a god's curse, a shadow that would one day rise and end the world. In the halls of Asgard, those whispers were heard too, for Odin knew what the serpent was destined to do, and Thor, son of thunder, had been told of the foe who would one day rise from the sea to meet him. It was said that serpent and thunderer were bound by fate, that the hammer and the coil were drawn together as storm and wave, lightning and flood, and though they had not yet met, their destinies already strained toward one another, like clouds gathering for a storm not yet broken. But in those ages before their clash, the serpent swam alone. He coiled through the dark, his body brushing the roots of mountains, his breath stirring the waters into whirlpools. The fish of the sea became his playthings, fleeing before him, darting through the shadows of his endless form. The whale's songs turned to silence when his shadow passed above. Even the krakens of old, vast and monstrous, curled into their caverns at his approach. For Jörmungandr was lord of the deep, and his reign was silent, patient, eternal. The sea itself became his mirror. In storms he thrashed and coiled, waves towering higher than cliffs, lightning flashing against his wet scales. In calm he lay unmoving, his vast body blending into the horizon, his breath barely stirring the surface. He had become part of the ocean, inseparable from it, a living current, a serpent that was also a sea. And yet, deep within him, a shadow stirred. For he was not merely a beast. He was a child of fate, and fate whispered always. It whispered of a day when he would rise from the waters, when the sky would darken, when thunder would roll and the hammer of Thor would strike against his coils. He did not know love, he did not know companionship, but he knew this. His end and his purpose were bound in battle. He was born to fight, to poison the sky, to choke the gods with his venom. And though that day was far, it pulsed within him like a heartbeat. Thor too dreamed of it. In the halls of Asgard he told stories of the great serpent, laughing in boast, his hand tightening on Mjolnir. He spoke of the day he would haul the monster from the sea, of the strike that would end its terror. Yet in the quiet of night even Thor felt a tremor of unease, for he too had seen in vision that the battle would end not in triumph, but in doom, that though he would slay the serpent, he himself would fall, poisoned by its breath. And so the bond grew between them, a bond of enmity, of destiny, of death. But until that day the serpent swam. He lay in the deep, his jaws upon his tail, his eyes half closed. Storms rose and fell above him, centuries passed, kingdoms rose and crumbled upon the land. Men built ships and lost them, gods feasted and grew weary. The 9 realms turned like leaves in the wind, and still Jörmungandr waited, coiled in patience, vast beyond measure, silent as the grave. The ocean was his cradle, his crown, his prison. He was the Midgard serpent, endless in body, endless in destiny. The world slept in his coils, and one day, when fate's whisper grew into a roar, he would rise. The seas would split, the sky would fall, and the thunderer would come with his hammer. Then the serpent's patience would end, and the storm would begin. In the hush after storm and laughter, when the feasts of Asgard had dwindled to quiet embers and the watchfires along Bifrost burned like patient stars, a rumor moved through the halls like a draught beneath a door. A daughter with a divided face, half warm with the breath of life, half pale as winter's last bone. She did not stride as Thor strode, nor sing as Bragi sang. She did not stamp the floor with boast or clatter a cup for praise. She stood at thresholds and listened. She learned the weight of silence before ever she spoke. Those who met her gaze felt the soft pull of sleep behind the eyes and the chill of waking in a room where no fire remains. They called her Hell. To look upon her was to understand what the day keeps hidden, that life and its shadow are 2 hands folded together, and neither lets the other go. Odin had seen her in water and smoke, one half lit by the low gold of candles, the other half the unmoving hush of grave earth. In dreams he heard doors unlatch, flocks go noiseless in the night, and a bridge appear in mist, thin as a breath on glass. He knew the world needed a keeper for those deaths that weren't sung about, fallings into age and illness, into the small and faithful endings every house knows. He knew as well that the living would not bear such a keeper at their table. And so the All-Father went to the daughter of Loki and Angerboda, and told her, without cruelty but without comfort, that she would be queen of a kingdom no feast would light. They traveled to the edge of the known, where frost has a voice and the sky wears its cold close to the bone. There, where the roots of Yggdrasil enter darkness and drink from hidden rivers, Odin lifted his hand and pointed into a gray that was not quite snow, not quite smoke. "This way," said his one wise eye, and the wind seemed to listen. She stepped forward. The path gave no footprints. It remembered nothing. Down she went, past places where echoes grew tired of themselves and lay down beside the stones, past blue-black drifts crusted with hoarfrost, past halls that had never been heated and never needed it. The breath of Niflheim moved against her like a veil, no malice in it, only the patient intention of cold. Hell crossed a river whose water carried the tint of moon metal. Some call it Gjöll, and say that on its far side stands a bridge of pale stone with a roof the color of night when snow is falling. Some say a woman keeps the crossing, asking why any traveler would come this way living. Hell did not answer. She was not a traveler. She was arriving. She walked farther until the mist thickened into architecture, the suggestion of corridors, the hint of a great room made from shade and stillness. Frost lay there like a sleeping animal. She placed her hands upon the air, and felt it give like doors that have only been waiting for the right touch. They opened. The realm that was hers received her without ceremony, as earth receives rain. In that place she learned the craft no one else desired. She learned how to count the breaths of those whose last breath lingers, how to weigh a life by its quiet tasks, the worn place on a stair, the cup rinsed after use, the seed gathered for next spring as if next spring were a vow the body never breaks. She learned the difference between fear and reverence, and between lament and praise, and she found that the dead do not need speeches so much as good order, a calm road, a hand lifted to show where to stand. She did not take a throne at once. She walked the wide gray of her halls and let the halls learn her tread. She listened to the distant thunder of seas above, the song of a serpent turning in his sleep. She tasted iron in the air and understood that grief, too, has a kind of weather. Her throne found her as a chair finds a reader who keeps coming back to the same window. The room around it was not built of wood or stone, but of return, the cadence of footsteps that always arrive, the hush of doors closing after long journeys. They call that hall by many names in many mouths. Some say El Yudnir, a hearthless great room with shadows that fall like cloth. Some say only that it is a place where the ache of leaving quiets in the ribs. A long table ran its length, and on it lay the plain abundance of her court, a cup named for the hunger that visits every life, a knife that remembers famine, a bed with blankets worn smooth by the weary, a rug of dust colors where dogs could sleep. If these were omens, they were homely ones, and if they were powers, they were gentle, the kind that keep a roof from leaking and a child from waking frightened. Word traveled without messengers. Somewhere in Midgard, a woman closed her father's eyes and found, in the last light, that fear had loosened its grip. Somewhere a shepherd looked up and realized the stars had arranged themselves into a pattern he could accept. Somewhere an old sailor's hands forgot the ropes they had tied all their days and unknotted into rest. The dead began to arrive not as a parade but as weather, slow snow, soft rain. They came with the smell of bread and fields and iron, with the small noises of ordinary lives, with names no skald would sing but that the rooms of their houses knew by heart. Hell received them without either pity or disdain. Her living side took their names and placed them where names are kept. Her other side, beautiful in its stillness, held the mirror of what ending means and did not turn away. Sometimes a warrior of no great renown wandered in with a wound that was not glorious. Sometimes a midwife, sometimes a mason. She set them where their ankles would not ache. She arranged the benches so those who had seldom spoken could find words at last, and those who had always spoken could learn a little listening. She made a rule against alarm and a rule against hurry. She decreed that every story be told at least once, and that no story, once told, be argued with. It was a realm of afterward, and afterward is not for argument. The living think of judgment as scales and flames. The dead think of it less often. Hell's judgment was placement, and her mercy was nearness. This one by the window that looks on memory, this one near the warm wall of forgetfulness, this one at the corner where laughter comes first, this one in the aisle where tears dry on their own. Unnumbered nights she sat without moving, listening to the rhythm of a city made of arrivals. Garm, the dog of that place, lay at the far door and raised his head for those who needed a companion to cross a last small distance. Sometimes she rose and walked to the threshold where the mist thinned. From there she could feel the almost sound of roots taking drink, and far beyond, the wheel of seasons turning in the lighted world. She did not envy it. She had weight and work. She had been given a kingdom whose map was written in breath and blankets and cups set down softly so as not to wake anyone. It is not nothing to hold that map and keep it legible. News from above came to her in oblique ways. A tremor in the river, a subtle brightening in the mist as if someone had said a name too loudly in a place where names are prayers. Once she felt the throb of a laugh so large it stirred dust in the rafters of her hall. She knew it as Thor's, carrying across the world like a drum. Once she felt the warm bruise of a lie going out dressed as a truth, and thought of Loki, who loved doors more than rooms, thresholds more than hearths. She kept her counsel. Queens of the afterward do not answer summons that were never sent. Odin returned only once, so far as anyone can say, and not with the pomp of kings. He stood in her hall with snow melting along the hem of his cloak and looked at the plainness of her order. "They are not frightened here," he said, as if surprised that death could be arranged without terror. She did not reply. He studied the half of her that gleamed with ordinary loveliness, the curve of cheek that sun might kiss, and then the half that was perfect in its refusal of blush or breath. "You will be asked for something," he said at last, and the sentence carried the weight of more winters than one. "Be ready to weigh the world." Then he was gone, a cold place where he had stood, and Garm placed his head upon the floorboards and slept. She thought about asking what he meant and chose instead to practice saying no and yes in a voice that made neither sound like a door slammed nor like a door left open in winter. She said them to the empty rooms until the empty rooms said them back without echo. Somewhere above, a god most beloved walked gardens the color of calm. Birds nested in the cups of his hands. A mother wrapped a child and slept without fear. A blind man learned the paths of his house and did not stumble. The world in those days rested like a harp tuned carefully and set aside where children will not touch it. But even the careful harp catches draughts. Even the patient cup is knocked. If prophecy visited her, it did so in the manner of her realm, modestly without the noise of trumpets. She dreamed of a mistletoe branch that did not agree with all the others. She dreamed of a hall whose floor showed no wear, because nothing heavy had ever required carrying there. She dreamed of eyes so beloved that grief would learn new country in their absence, and of hands that would try to lift grief like a stone, and find that grief is not stone, but weather. In the dreams a woman came whose shoes did not wet though she passed over rivers and through storms. The woman did not speak, only counted, 1, 2, 10, 1,000, until the numbers grew thin with sorrow. Hell had time, as all queens of the afterward do. She could set a table and she could wait. She could listen to the dead learn that they were dead, which takes for most less effort than the living suppose. She could hear in the stride of each new arrival whether the house they left had been kind. She could tell which doors in which towns would be closed lightly after news was carried, and which would be thrown wide to let sorrow out into the yard where it can breathe. She could tell where love had been diligent and where it had been lazy. None of this was to her credit. She was not judge, not scribe. She was a keeper. Keepers know the difference between naming and owning. So it went, and quiet accrued like frost upon hedges. The dead learned the logics of their new address. The living grew older in their sun-burnished world. Between the two, a bridge stood in mist with the patience of a book left open and not forgotten. If sometimes a skald spoke hell's name, it was with a shiver not entirely of fear, for the thought that the last room might be well kept is a comfort even to those who never say it aloud. One evening, though evening is only a way of speaking down where light has no strict professions. She stood and set her hand upon the back of the chair that had chosen her. The grain of it felt like river lines under thin ice. "There will be a test," she said, not to her court but to the floor that holds all courts up. "There will be a asking." She did not mean a riddle. She meant a counting. How many voices can carry one love? How many eyes can fill for one pair that no longer opens? How far can the world lean together before the bench creaks and the leg gives? She did not smile. She does not make sport of labor. Some say she arranged her hair just then, pinning back the living half with a simple bone comb and letting the other half fall into its natural hush. Some say a bird flew in, confused by the lack of wind, and sat upon the sill for a time and then went again. Some say Garm thumped his tail once, a sound like a small drum. It may be so. It may be not. In any case, she returned to the work that has no flourish, placing names where they will be found, smoothing blankets, letting the endless arriving continue. When the time comes, because time keeps its appointments even with queens who do not wear clocks, the most beloved in Asgard will taste a sleep deeper than even the songs of that house can hold. Bells will be rung without instruction. Mothers will stand at doors and know a world has grown thinner. A god will ride down with gold on his words and ask for a bargain that is not quite a bargain but a petition, to let what has ended end less. And hell will weigh what is asked not against her mood, nor against any ledger kept by gods, but against the one sure measure she has mastered, the order of afterward. She will ask for a proof the world can scarcely make, and she will not tune her answer to flattery. Queens of kitchens and thresholds and last rooms do not flatter. They lay out plates and ask whether all hands will help with the washing up. Until then, her realm remains as she made it, mist that knows where it is going, benches that remember the weight of those who sat before, a hearth that does not burn but keeps. Travelers who cross the bridge speak in murmurs afterward of a calm that is not indifference, of a beauty that does not court applause. They say the queen there looks at you as mothers look when you have come home late and safe, one half relief, one half instruction. They say she turns no one back who has business there, and no one stays who has none, and if they speak her name, they do it softly, as if a sleeping child lay on the other side of the wall and they would not wake it. Above, the sea keeps its serpent, the sky keeps its storms, the gods keep their cups and boasts in long bright afternoons. Below, she keeps the rest. When the great bridge flexes under the mass of grief that will one day cross it, her hall will not creak. It has learned the music of heavy things set down gently. When the beloved arrives, because even the beloved arrive, she will sit on the chair that found her and ask the only question that matters in a room like hers. Where shall we set this love so that it does not shatter? And the answer will not be a law or a curse or a triumph. It will be placement. It will be nearness. It will be a place at the table by a window the living cannot see, where the cup does not empty, and the field beyond is always almost spring. In the stillness between storms, when the world seemed to breathe with the rhythm of seasons and the gods allowed themselves a fragile calm, the three children of Loki lived apart, each exiled into a fate heavy with silence. They were bound not by the warmth of family but by the threads of prophecy, threads so taut they trembled even before the Norn's touch. Fenrir lay chained upon a plain in Asgard, Gleipnir's ribbon of impossibilities tight upon his limbs. His breath was the whisper of thunder before rain, his muscles swelling though they could not break the bonds. At times he remembered the hand of Tyr feeding him, the only kindness given, and at times he dreamed of his jaws closing around the light of the sun. Though he was surrounded by gods, he was utterly alone, watched as one might watch the crack in a dam, fearful of when it would burst. Jörmungandr slept in the deep, the weight of oceans pressing upon his endless coils. He circled the world, his jaws locked upon his tail, an Ouroboros born not of philosophy but of doom. He was silence beneath storms, a shadow beneath ships, a whisper in the dreams of sailors. No eye beheld him without terror, yet in his loneliness he became a sea unto himself, a living current. The cold embraced him, the abyss taught him patience, and he waited in the dark for a clash written long before his first breath. Hell ruled below in mist and frost, in halls where no sun had ever wandered. Her face, half beautiful and half pale with decay, was a kingdom's map, life and death drawn side by side. She gathered the forgotten dead, those who did not fall in glory, those who slipped into night quietly. Her throne was shadow, her court a stillness that no laughter disturbed. Yet even she felt the pulse of prophecy, a whisper in the roots of Yggdrasil that told her she too would one day rise into the songs of the living world. And above them, upon the roots of Yggdrasil, where the well of Urd flowed with waters of memory and fate, the Norns wove. 3 women, older than gods, older than men, sat in patient silence. Urd, who remembers what was. Verdandi, who knows what is. Skuld, who whispers what will be. With their fingers they drew threads from past into present, from present into future, and the names of Loki's children passed beneath their touch. They saw the wolf, his rage smoldering, his hunger unsated, the sun caught in his jaws as though it were no more than meat torn from a carcass. They saw the serpent, rising from the sea, his venom darkening the sky, lightning flashing upon his coils as Thor lifted his hammer in defiance. They saw the pale queen, standing unmoved as a god most beloved entered her halls, her decision weighing not upon her heart, but upon the order of her kingdom. These visions flowed into their loom, each thread pulled tight, each knot sealed. The web was vast, and within it the struggles of gods were as inevitable as the setting of the sun. The Aesir, though they feasted and boasted, felt the weight of these unseen weavings. Around the fire in Odin's hall they whispered of the wolf, chained yet restless, of the serpent, hidden yet growing, of the queen, silent yet waiting. Some urged that they should strike, end the children before fate could bloom. But Odin, wise and weary, knew that to kill what fate has declared necessary is to hasten its fulfillment. And so they watched and they waited, speaking in low voices, drinking with forced laughter, their eyes straying always toward shadow. Loki walked among them still, half companion, half enemy, his smile sly, his words sharp. Some said he loved his children, others that he feared them, still others that he cared for nothing but the spark of mischief that burned always in his chest. Yet in his quiet moments, when no one watched, his gaze would drift toward the sea, toward the plains, toward the misty depths. He felt the tug of blood, of kinship, of guilt that pressed like a stone upon his ribs. But he was Loki, trickster, liar, fire-born. Guilt became jest, sorrow became mask, and even to himself he seemed a puzzle that would never yield an answer. Sometimes he dreamed. In dreams he stood before the wolf, unchained and burning, and the wolf turned his face away. He saw the serpent, vast enough to blot out the sky, and the serpent ignored him as if he were nothing. He saw the queen, cold and unmoved, who met his gaze not as daughter to father, but as ruler to petitioner. He woke from such dreams with laughter that sounded too much like sobbing, and with eyes that gleamed in firelight, though no flame was near. The Norns watched him too, though he did not know it. They wove his thread into theirs, knotting it with those of his children, binding father to offspring, mischief to ruin, laughter to weeping. He was not apart from their fate, but the root of it, the soil in which the seeds of doom had grown, and as they wove, their whispers stirred the air, drifting like snow into the halls of Asgard, like salt into the deep, like frost into Hell's realm. The gods shivered though no wind blew. The sea darkened though no storm had come. The dead stirred in their rest though no trumpet had sounded. The threads grew tighter, and in their tightening, the promise of the end grew closer. Thus the three children of Loki lived apart, yet together, bound by fate's loom. Fenrir strained against his bonds. Jörmungandr tightened his coils around the world. Hel seated herself upon her throne. The gods worried, the Norns whispered, and Loki laughed and wept by turns. The story of their lives was not life at all but prophecy, and prophecy does not sleep. It waits, it weaves, it binds, and in its binding, the world itself leaned closer to its final hour. In the stillness of Asgard's far plain, where no feasts were held and no laughter dared travel, there lay a shadow that did not sleep. Fenrir, the wolf of prophecy, bound by Gleipnir's ribbon, stretched upon the ground like a mountain forced to crawl, breathed in silence. Around his limbs the thin silk coil shimmered, deceptively gentle to the eye, yet stronger than any iron forged by gods or dwarves. He strained once, long ago, and learned its secret. He could not break it. Since then he had ceased the thrashing of youth and instead lay waiting, his heart beating in the same rhythm as storms unborn. From his vantage he saw time move as few creatures ever have. Seasons came and went like shadows of clouds across a field. Snow laid its blanket, melted and was forgotten. Grass rose, turned gold, bowed, and vanished. Trees sprouted, thickened, withered, fell. The gods came and went, sometimes watching him with fear, sometimes with pride at their cunning, sometimes with indifference as if he were a trophy nailed against the wall of fate. But he saw them all, and in his eyes their ages shortened, their boasts thinned, and their laughter trembled. For he, bound though he was, endured. The sun traveled its endless road above, yet to Fenrir it was prey waiting in the distance, always moving but never escaping. At times he closed his eyes and dreamed of the chase, his muscles free, his paws striking earth, the golden disk burning before him until at last it sank between his jaws. These dreams were not joy, they were ache, gnawing ache that chewed upon his soul more sharply than hunger ever had. And hunger was with him always. He fed upon nothing now but bitterness. Meat had once satisfied him, but bonds and betrayal left him starving for justice, for release, for vengeance. The gods thought the sword they had driven between his jaws had silenced him. Its hilt pressed against his gums, its blade wedged in his throat. His saliva spilled into rivers, frothing into a stream men would call Von. Yet though his mouth was forced, his voice had not been killed. His howl still shook the sky when rage rose too high. His growl rumbled in the earth, low and endless like a storm that will not break. Each time the gods heard it, they glanced at one another, remembering the hand Tyr had lost, remembering the trust that had been broken. They comforted themselves with mead, but none could drink away the echo. Through years and years of stillness, Fenrir felt the tremor of destiny move beneath him like a second heartbeat. At first it was faint, so faint he thought it only the sound of his own blood. But with time, it grew. He felt it in the roots of Yggdrasil, the faint shudder as though the tree were tired. He smelled it in the air, the faint bitterness of endings. He saw it in the eyes of gods, a flicker of fear that never entirely left them. And in the silence of his waiting, he understood. The day of doom was not far. What is it to wait as a beast that cannot move? It is to live inside the long stretch of moments, to feel the world's heartbeat as your own. For Fenrir, each snowflake that melted upon his fur carried the weight of years. Each bird that landed near his chains and flew away was a mark upon eternity. He grew vast even in his stillness, his body filling with strength that had nowhere to go. His spirit hardened into a blade sharper than Tyr's missing hand could have ever held. His eyes burned not with the wild playfulness of a cub, but with the weary, endless fire of a prisoner who has counted the passing of too many days. He remembered, too, the face of Tyr, the only god who had shown him kindness. In his heart, trust and betrayal braided together like the threads the Norns wove beneath the roots. Sometimes he almost grieved for the hand he had taken, for the friendship that had been real though it was drowned in deceit. But grief turned to anger, anger to hunger, hunger to silence. His silence was heavier than his chains. As the ages bent toward the twilight of the world, Fenrir began to sense it, the cracking of order, the loosening of bonds not yet broken but trembling in their fastenings. He felt Jörmungandr stirring in the sea, thrashing against storms. He felt hell's cold halls expanding, filling with voices not yet born. He felt Loki's laughter tremble between jest and bitterness. He felt Odin's one eye turn toward him often, not with triumph, but with dread. And deep within, he knew the day would come when Gleipnir, woven of impossibilities, would weaken. The silken ribbon would snap, not by his strength alone, but by the decree of destiny itself. And when it did, his hunger would find its meal. He would run faster than storms, and the golden prey that mocked him through centuries would at last fall into his jaws. The sky itself would tremble when his howl rose unbound. And he would not be alone. The serpent would rise, the dead would march, the trickster would unleash his final jest. The gods who laughed when he was bound would learn what it was to be devoured. Until that day, he waited, his body bound, his heart unbound, his jaws aching, his hunger endless. The sun moved above him, seasons died and returned, yet in his eyes the world was already ash, already trembling on the brink of silence. Bound upon the plain, Fenrir dreamed not of freedom, but of inevitability, and his dreams were not quiet. They were the drumbeat of Ragnarok, echoing in chains, echoing in silence, echoing in hunger that no god could ignore forever. In the vast silence of the deep, where no sunbeam dares to fall and where the weight of waters folds upon itself like dark cloth, there lay a coil so endless that even the ocean could scarcely contain it. Jörmungandr, the serpent born of shadow and flame, had grown beyond the measure of beasts, beyond the memory of beginnings. Cast down by Odin into the sea when still a restless child, he had fallen and sunk, deeper and deeper, until the surface above became only a memory of light. There in the abyss he found his cradle, and there he grew. He grew as waves grow, patient yet unstoppable. Each century was to him the span of a heartbeat. Each storm above was felt as a whisper across his scales. His body wound through mountains of stone that no man would ever see, his coils brushing the roots of the world itself. Fish swam near him as sparks swim near a torch, only to vanish into his endless hunger. Whales, great as hills, found themselves no more than morsels in his maw. He swallowed them whole, yet even they left his appetite unsatisfied, for it was not food alone that he craved. It was the completion of a circle, the fulfillment of a destiny whispered to him in the black water, that he was to encircle the world, that his very body would be the boundary between land and sea. And so he grew until his head found his tail, and he closed his jaws upon it. In that moment, the earth itself seemed cradled in his form, sleeping in the loop of his being. Yet though he held the world in silence, he was not at peace. For beneath his scales beat a heart filled with prophecy, and prophecy does not rest. The threads of fate whispered always in the current, telling him of a day when the sea would boil and the thunderer would come for him. Thor, bright son of Odin, breaker of giants, wielder of Mjolnir. Even in the deep, Jörmungandr knew his name, for destiny binds not by distance but by necessity. They were halves of one tale, storm and wave, hammer and coil. Neither could end without the other. At times, when the waters above calmed and the moon spread a silver path across the sea, Jörmungandr rose. He lifted his vast head from the waves and gazed upon the horizon. Sailors who saw him thought they had glimpsed a mountain moving, or the black line of land itself where no land was. His eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, and the wind seemed to freeze in fear. Then he sank again, leaving only silence, only ripples that the gulls could not understand. Word spread in Midgard of a serpent who lived in the sea, so vast that his body circled the world, so terrible that his stirring brought storms. And so the story of his enmity with Thor grew before they ever met. Skald sang of a day yet to come, when Thor would take a humble boat upon the waves, casting a line into waters too deep for men. Upon that line he would set an ox's head for bait, and Jörmungandr would rise to seize it. Sea against sky, serpent against storm. The hammer would lift, and the serpent's head would surge, and the clash would shake even the roots of Yggdrasil. Some said Thor would kill the beast. Some whispered that in killing it he too would fall, poisoned by its venom. The Norns wove both stories into one, for prophecy is a circle just as the serpent is. Yet in the meantime, there was only waiting. Jörmungandr lay in the deep, his coils pressing against the hidden mountains, his breath stirring whirlpools unseen. The ocean itself seemed to pulse with his slumber. In calm days, fishermen felt it as a hush before dawn, when the water is too still and the birds too silent. In storm they felt his stirring, waves that rose too high, winds that screamed too sharply. He was always there, beneath them, a presence in every tide, in every wave, in every sigh of the sea. Still he waited, patient as darkness, vast as eternity. The world moved above him, kingdoms rising and falling, men building ships and losing them, gods feasting and fearing, the sun blazing and dimming, the moon waning and returning. All this Jörmungandr knew in silence, the circle unbroken, the hunger unending. He did not need to chase his fate. It was already moving toward him, carried by thunder. For Thor's laughter rang across the heavens, and even in the abyss the serpent could hear it, a drumbeat that promised a storm to come. Thus he lay, the serpent beneath the waves, endless in his waiting, endless in his patience, endless in his doom. The ocean was his cradle, his cage, and his crown. And though he dreamed not of mercy, nor of rest, he dreamed always of the storm. For one day when the circle broke and Ragnarok unfurled, he would rise, jaws gaping, venom spilling, and the Thunderer would stand against him. Until then the sea kept his secret, and the world slept in his coils. In the farthest reaches of Niflheim, where frost hangs heavy in the air and silence settles thicker than snow, the halls of hell spread like mist across a valley that knew no dawn. Her palace was no fortress of gold, no bright hall with shining shields upon its walls. It was Eljudnir, the house of the dead, a great chamber of shadows where cold seeped into stone and stone into silence. There the dead gathered, not as an army but as a multitude without song. They came in whispers, old men who had slipped from sleep and not returned, women whose strength had drained in the long ache of sickness, children who had not lived to see their first harvest. Their steps left no sound, their voices carried no boast, their eyes looked not forward but inward. Hell sat among them as both sovereign and witness. Her body bore the truth of her realm, one half soft and fair, a face touched with youth's beauty, the other half pale and withered, the color of bone long buried. In her, life and death met without struggle, each side gazing with calm acceptance. She listened as the dead entered, one by one, like raindrops filling an endless sea. To some she gave rest in halls lit with a dim comfort, where benches held companions who understood their sorrow. To others she offered stillness so deep it felt like exile, a seat at a table where words no longer mattered. Judgment was not her weapon, placement was. And so she ruled, by arranging what had already ended. Above in Asgard, the bright halls still gleamed with gold, yet even there the whispers of doom crept like draughts beneath their doors. For the most beloved of the gods, Baldur, fairer than any, had fallen. His death came not in battle, not in glory, but by trick and by fate, pierced by a slender dart of mistletoe. When his body was laid upon the pyre, flames licked the sky, and all 9 realms shuddered with grief. Yet grief could not undo what had been done. His soul traveled downward across the bridge of Gjöll into the misty gates where hell waited. The gods of Asgard, stricken with sorrow, turned their eyes toward the Queen of Shadows. For though they feared her, they also needed her. Only she had the power to return what had crossed her threshold. So Odin sent Hermodr, the swift, to ride Sleipnir across the dark lands, to beg for Baldur's release. He passed the bridge, past the guard who asked why any living soul came so far, and entered the hall where Hel sat upon her throne. There she listened. Hermodr spoke of Asgard's grief, of the gods' despair, of the tears that fell from every eye for Baldur. His words trembled like fire and wind, pleading for mercy, for reversal, for a gift against fate. Hel heard him in silence, her living half softened by the weight of sorrow, her dead half unmoved, calm as stone. When she spoke, her voice was steady, like frost forming across a window. If Baldur is so beloved, she said, then let the whole world prove it. If every living thing, God, man, beast, bird, stone, and tree, if all that breathes and all that stands will weep for him, then I will release him. Let their tears be his ransom, and let the world's grief open the door of my hall. But if any refuse, then here he will remain. Such is the order of death, and such is my judgment. Her words fell like snow, light in sound but heavy in consequence. Hermodr bowed, hope and dread mingling, and departed to carry the message. Hel sat in stillness once more, the flickering torchlight reflecting across her divided face. Around her, the dead murmured, their voices neither approval nor protest, but the sighing of leaves that no longer cling to branches. The gods wept, the trees shed their leaves, the stones glistened as though wet with sorrow. Across the 9 realms all creation mourned, but not all. A single giantess, said to be Loki in disguise, refused. Her refusal was enough. The tears of the world, vast though they were, could not weigh against the silence of one denial. Balder remained in Hel's hall, his beauty dimmed, his fate sealed. And so the gods learned that even they, with all their might, could not undo the order Hel kept. She was not their enemy, yet neither was she their friend. She was necessary, inevitable, untouchable. In her hall, all were equal, gods and men, kings and farmers, warriors and children. No crown mattered, no sword prevailed. Her throne did not glitter, but it did not fall. Thus fear mingled with need in the hearts of Asgard's lords. They shuddered when they spoke her name, yet they bowed in silence when her will was known. For Hel was the keeper of what none could keep from her, the queen of shadows whose realm no god could unmake. And though her voice was calm, though her hand was steady, the fate she held was weight enough to silence even the greatest. Above, the sun still shone, the mead still flowed, Thor still laughed, and Odin still watched. But beneath, in the misted quiet, Hel waited, patient and unyielding. Balder remained with her, and his presence was not cruelly kept, but simply held, like rain absorbed into earth. The gods might scheme, the giants might rage, the Norns might weave, but Hel's hall endured, untouched by storm or fire. For she was not merely Loki's daughter. She was the stillness after endings, the keeper of silence, the queen of shadows. And in her throne room, mist curling at her feet, she looked into the distance with eyes that had already seen the fall of gods, and found it unsurprising. In the deep silence that comes before storms, when the air itself seems to listen, the 9 realms began to tremble with unease. It was not yet the end, not yet the roar of Ragnarok, but the whispers had already begun. They came as omens scattered like seeds across sky and sea, plain and hall, signs that the prophecies the Norns had woven were no longer distant threads, but taut chords, vibrating in the loom of time. In Asgard, the gods feasted, yet their laughter faltered, for even in the mead halls they felt the weight of approaching dread. The air grew colder, though fires blazed bright. The moon turned its face away behind veils of cloud, and the sun seemed dimmer in its path. Dreams plagued the wise, visions of chains breaking and seas rising. Even Odin, who had traded his eye for wisdom, grew quiet at the table, hearing in his heart the slow approach of fate. Upon the plain where Fenrir lay bound, the silence was heavier still. The ribbon Gleipnir, thin as silk yet strong as destiny, quivered under the strain of his vast body. He had ceased his thrashing long ago, for thrashing brought no freedom. Now he only pulled with the slow strength of years, each breath another pressure, each growl another test. The sword wedged in his jaws groaned, and his saliva flowed thicker into the river Van, frothing with the bitterness of ages. In his eyes burned not only rage but certainty. He knew, as beasts sometimes know before storms, that the hour of breaking was near, and in the deep seas Jörmungandr stirred. The serpent who had once lain silent, coiled around the world in patience, now moved. his coils pressed against the ocean floor, shaking mountains unseen. Whirlpools rose on the surface where fishermen cast their nets, only to be dragged into silence. The horizon darkened with no storm in sight, yet waves swelled, carrying the weight of something vast turning in the deep. Lightning flashed without thunder, as if the sky itself flinched at what lay beneath. Jörmungandr's eyes, glowing faintly in the abyss, opened after centuries of slumber. His tongue flickered, tasting not only the salt of the sea, but the taste of endings, sharp as iron. In Helheim, the stillness shifted. Eljudnir, the hall of the dead, long accustomed to silence, began to hum with an unspoken readiness. The dead who had sat quietly, resting in their benches, now stirred as if called by an unseen trumpet. Their voices, once murmurs of memory, rose faintly like wind through grave grass. Hel herself sat upon her throne, her divided face watching with calm that was colder than fear. She did not smile, nor frown, but her eyes glimmered with knowledge that the time for her realm to open was drawing close. She had waited with patience eternal, and now the weight of countless souls pressed like an army at the gates of her hall. Her hands, pale and steady, rested on her throne, prepared to lift when the moment came to loose the flood of the dead. The Norns wove still, their fingers quick, their eyes shadowed. Urd murmured of what had already been. The wolf betrayed, the serpent cast down, the queen enthroned. Verdandi whispered of what now was, the shaking of the earth, the stirring of the seas, the shifting of shadows in Hel's hall. Skuld, silent and implacable, drew forth the thread of what was to come, and her eyes gleamed with the brightness of doom. The loom quivered with every thread they set, and the fabric of fate was heavy with images of fire, collapse, and silence. Across Midgard, men looked to the skies and felt dread, though they knew not why. Crops failed in fields, though rains had come. Birds fled from forests with no hunter near. Wolves howled in daylight when they should have slept. Children woke in night terrors, speaking of great waves and endless fire. Sailors returned with tales of something vast moving beneath their ships, a darkness that swallowed the moon's reflection whole. Even the gods, proud though they were, could not banish the whispers from their minds. Thor tightened his grip on Mjolnir more often, his laughter forced, his eyes scanning the horizon as though seeking storm clouds that had not yet broken. Freya wept golden tears, though she knew not the reason. Heimdall's sharp ears rang with echoes he could not place, a horn's call that had not yet been sounded. Odin, high upon his throne, looked out over the 9 realms, and though he spoke no word, his silence was more dreadful than any cry. And beneath it all, the wolf strained, the serpent shifted, the queen of shadows prepared. Fate was no longer a whisper in distant halls, no longer a story told in fireside songs. It was here, pulsing in every shadow, trembling in every breath, weaving itself into every heartbeat of the world. The bonds were weakening, the sea was rising, the gates of the dead trembled on their hinges. Still, silence lingered for a while longer, for doom moves slowly before it strikes. But every soul, god, giant, man, beast, felt it in their marrow. The waiting was almost at an end. And in that waiting, the whisper of Ragnarök grew louder, like a tide drawing back before the final wave. In the long twilight of the world, when the skies had grown heavy with unspoken dread and the earth itself seemed to hold its breath, the threads of fate tightened to breaking. What the Norns had whispered in shadows, what Odin had feared in visions, what even Loki had half laughed, half wept over in dreams, now stirred into waking. The children of chaos, long divided and waiting, began to rise. Upon the silent plain where Fenrir had lain bound for ages, the thin ribbon Gleipnir trembled. It had once seemed unbreakable, a silken chain woven from impossibilities, stronger than iron or stone. Yet even impossibility cannot withstand destiny. The wolf's muscles, vast as mountains, strained with a slow strength born not of fury alone but of centuries of waiting. His jaws, wedged open by a sword, gnashed with a grinding sound that echoed through the 9 realms. Saliva ran in rivers, frothing into torrents. Then, with a sound like the snapping of Yggdrasil's roots, the fetters burst. Gleipnir shredded into shreds of light, scattering like dying stars across the plain. Fenrir rose. He shook his mane, black as the void, his eyes burning with rage and hunger. The sun above dimmed as though already it felt the weight of his jaws. Far beneath the sea, Jörmungandr stirred from the abyss. The coils that had encircled the world tightened, then loosened, then thrashed. Waves heaved, mountains of water towering higher than any cliff. Storms broke without wind. Lightning cracked from a sky already dark with foreboding. The serpent lifted his head above the waves, his eyes glowing green in the gloom. His breath was venom, spilling into the sea, staining its surface black. Ships shattered like toys, their crews vanishing without cry. Jörmungandr's body, longer than the horizon, rose and rose, circling Midgard like a noose. The world shivered in his coils, and in Helheim the gates groaned upon their hinges. Eljudnir, the Hall of Shadows, no longer held its multitude in stillness. The dead stirred in legions, their pale faces lifted toward the queen upon her throne. Hel sat calm, half beautiful and half decayed, her eyes steady as eternity. She raised her hand and the doors of her realm burst wide. Out poured the dead in countless numbers, not wailing, not shouting, but marching in silence. Their footsteps fell like the tolling of a bell. Through mist and frost they came, filling the valleys, crossing the rivers, ascending the roads to the world of the living. An army of silence, a tide of those forgotten, their strength not in weapons but in inevitability. The earth shook. Yggdrasil quivered from root to crown, its branches trembling in the storm of doom. The sky reddened, the stars dimmed, the sun staggered in its course. From plain and sea, from hall and mountain, the 3 children of Loki rose. Fenrir, jaws wide to devour light. Jörmungandr, body coiled to strangle the world. Hel, hand lifted to send her endless host into the fray. 3 voices of prophecy, 3 shadows of fate, 3 harbingers of the end. The gods felt it in their hearts. Thor tightened his grip on Mjolnir, hearing in the thunder not only his own voice but the serpent's call. Odin gazed upon Fenrir and saw his doom in the beast's blazing eyes. The Valkyries rode with wings of flame, yet even their cries faltered at the sound of the dead marching from below. All the laughter of ages, all the songs of skalds, all the golden halls and shining spears, none could hold back what had now begun. And still the children of chaos moved forward. Fenrir leapt, each step shaking mountains. His howl tore through the sky, shattering clouds into storms. Jörmungandr surged, his coils dragging across the ocean floor, lifting waves that swallowed coastlines whole. Hel's army spread, a pall over every land, filling the air with silence deeper than death. Together, they formed the great chord of ending, each note essential, each voice joined in the dirge that was Ragnarok. Yet in their rising there was no joy, no cruelty, only inevitability. They had waited as the Norns decreed, bound by chains, buried in sea, enthroned in shadow. Now they rose because the world itself had called for its own unraveling. They were not intruders, but children of its order, shadows long cast finally reaching their shape. Thus the dusk of the gods began, not with a sudden flame, but with a long and patient darkening. The wolf, the serpent, and the queen of shadows moved as one, and the 9 realms bent beneath them. Fenrir's hunger stretched toward the sun. Jörmungandr's coils crushed the horizon. Hell's silence fell upon the living like a second night, and in the echo of their rising, the whisper of Ragnarok became a roar that no one could deny. The world trembled, the tree shook, the heavens burned, and still they came. Children of chaos, bound no longer, carrying upon their shoulders the end of all things. And the end was vast, and the end was near, and the end was only the beginning of silence.